All right, hey everybody. So this is Josh Bruce, and this sort of marks the last of the string class series and bridging into something completely different but the same. So the string class, right, started out as something experimenting on my phone, just wanting to see if I could mimic the Swift API for their basic data types, specifically the string class. And eventually got too big for the phone, moved it over to the computer, blah, blah, blah. And the rest is history, right? And we have a pretty nice string class. And a lot of times when I do sort of these types of projects, the reason that I'm doing them is I'm trying to see how I would solve a very specific problem. So, for example, if we come over here to our friend GitHub and we go to eightfold, or no, sorry, I recently switched, can't remember which repos I put into GitHub versus GitLab. So I'm thinking about moving just all of them back, but GitLab allows me to do private repos and as an organization, so there is that. So if we take a look at PHP HTML component, right, as a project in a library, well, it's not really a library, it's like a file or two. What I was really trying to solve here was, or at least experiment with, is the notion of get your HTML out of my, or no, get your PHP out of my HTML, right? So, and the reason that people say stuff like that is because, so many of us are accustomed to writing PHP as part of a template engine because that's what PHP is, right? So you might have something like P, and then you'll have PHP, and it'll be a variable that you get from somewhere, and then you go ahead and echo that out, and then you end the P element and continue on your way. Well, one of the big arguments was that that got us toward template engines over the years was get PHP out of your HTML, right? And just looking at these tokens and that sort of a thing, the PHP tokens. And so that's why we get stuff like, so this is, could be blade, could be mustache, could be whatever. So instead of the PHP tokens, you have two curly braces back together, right? And so now, so understand what's going on here, right? So the browser is going to request something from the server. The server is going to look at it and say, this is PHP, let me spin up PHP and hand it over to, PHP. So then PHP, when it gets to something like this, what it's looking for is it's going to start parsing, looking for these left angle bracket question mark PHP or some of the other syntax that are available. But that's not the case with most modern PHP applications, right? The case with most modern PHP applications is that we're basically going to build it all up and we're going to use a template engine. Now, so the way that works is that basically the template engine eventually, when we're getting ready to send the result back, whatever the result string is going to be, in this case HTML, we're getting ready to send that back, and the template engine is going to parse over that template, and it's going to then replace the curly braces with the PHP echo token, da 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 da, right? That's basically how Laravel Blade works. Now, Laravel does escape special characters, and it does some interesting things behind the scenes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it ends up with left angle bracket question mark PHP echo some value semicolon question mark, right angle bracket, and it's inside of HTML. So we haven't removed the HTML from, or haven't removed the PHP from the HTML. We've just masked it, right, and added another parsing step. So now PHP has parsed our actual code. We're going to get ready to build this thing, and so we have a parser that is going to parse this template, and then we're going to hand that over to actual PHP to then parse it again before sending it back on its way. And so I sort of got into this discussion with myself, and I said, you know what? What if it's not that we need to get the PHP out of our HTML, and instead we need to get the HTML out of our PHP? What would that look like? And so basically I started creating this. And what it is it's basically something that will create HTML elements, right? So you see we have this extends and roll, and it doesn't have a lot of attributes and things, but sort of here's where the magic really happens. But to give you a better sense of how this, or what this is actually doing, and why it's get HTML out of my PHP, is that if we take a look at the base test, that's not what I was going for, component test. Yeah, this works. Okay. So if we take a look at, is there a way for me to make this word wrap? So if we take a look at this test page, right, basically the string up top is an actual HTML page, right? So we've got the HTML wrapper, we've got the head with a title and a style tag inside of it, and then we have the body. The body has an image, it's going to have some stuff going on, and then we have a paragraph, and then we even have a link, which is a custom component called myLink. And so on and so forth, right? But and so it looks like HTML, right? Left angle bracket, tag name, right angle bracket, da 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 da. Right. So now, if we look at the code that actually makes that work, we have component : HTML. Done. Inside of that function, we can then pass n number of other children components. Right? And so basically just I can make this do sort of whatever I want or using that one component, right? I can give it attributes, right? That's what the attr method is all about. And I can say that we should omit the end tag. Most elements in HTML have an end tag, so that's why you have to turn it off. It's not something that you opt out of. And then basically, once I have all this stuff set up, right, PHP hasn't run anything yet. I'm going to hit this compile, and basically compile is going to go as deep as it can into the method chain, and it's going to start pulling strings together all the way back up. And then it's going to go down again and then pull it all back up. So basically, right now, we have no HTML in our PHP. So thought that was kind of cool. Now, then we also have so when I created HTML component, that's what I was solving. Now, the hard problem to solve, right, which is actually sort of the problem that PHP solves, is how do I get to inject my variables inside of a wrapper element? And that's exactly what component does, right? Because you're constantly going into the elements, and you can just keep peppering it with, drop off your variables wherever you want to, and then as it's going, it'll compile back up. All right, so now this prompted me to create something. Well, I think I actually created this first and then pulled component out. But basically, if we go to PHP HTML, now what this is it's basically the HTML5 spec, right? So you can see right here, HTML H1, so that's going to be an H1 tag. So instead of saying component colon h1, or rather, yeah, I think that's what it is. Basically, you just say HTML colon h1 and then go on about your day. And so what's kind of interesting for me, right, because again, these are all just sort of exercises that, that we're doing here. So that gets us into everything else. So here's the elements. So one of the things that I did is I actually grouped it similar to the HTML5 specification. This is going somewhere. It's not a sales pitch for these two libraries, promise. So if we come in here, this is HTML 5.2. Did they change it? No, they did not. Okay, so if we come down, so inside of the spec, it has this breakdown, right? So document metadata, sections, grouping content. And if you look at the way that I architected all the folders and everything, you can see that we've got the same thing. We've got metadata, grouping, root, script, that sort of a deal. So let's start heading after the P element, right? So it's in grouping content, so I know where that is, right? Like therefore, I can look at the HTML5 spec, and I'm being informed about how this is laid out, right? So P should be in here. There's P. Right? So I'm going to go ahead and select P. If we come back to the spec, you can see that it has categories, right? What categories does this thing fit into? Wow, this is a horrible one. P, you're too generic, man. All right, so really that's all it has? Sorry, I made this automated, a lot of it. Yeah, optional attributes. Wow. Let me try DL. Yeah, DL's a little bit better. Okay, so let's go back over to the spec. So, all right. Categories. Where does this thing go? Right. So we have a function called categories, and basically it goes into flow content or palpable content. In what context can it be used? Well, flow. Right. Flow content. What is the content model? Right. What's possible with this thing? So if we come down to the content model, you can put in DT, DD, and script supporting. And so basically what ends up happening is this thing can actually start telling you whether or not you messed up in your HTML. And I don't think there's ever a hard failure, but what it will do, and it does use component, right? So the other one that we were looking at. But basically, if you come in here, where did I put that? Yeah, so you can see like this is a lot cleaner than component is. Like it just, here's my tag and here's the stuff that goes in it. Did I have one to test? It's not there. So I had one. I thought I had it as a test, but this is definitely a feature. And basically what it'll do is it will, here we go. Yeah, so this is the test. So basically the unordered list, DT does not have the unordered list as a valid context. And so what I did is that if you put that, because they know each other as like the child knows the parent, and what it does is it asks the parent, what are your contexts? And then it says, what are my categories? Do those things fit? No. Okay, hey, I don't think I can be a direct descendant of UL. Right? Like DT says, I don't think this thing should be my parent. So anyway, so it's solving different problems, and with this, I'm not going to lie, part of it is that we have a tendency to write really bad HTML, right? Like I've seen some really horrible HTML. One of the side benefits of this library here, this is the sales pitch. One of the side benefits of this library is that basically this is it's a minified HTML string. So basically it doesn't have any of the tabs or the white space that is unnecessary for the machine. It's helpful for humans, but it's unnecessary for the machine. And so basically, you know, if you consider that a tab is about 8 bytes, then or 8 bits. Is it 8 bits or 1 byte? I got nothing. Anyway, a non-arbitrary amount of memory, especially when you multiply it by 800 inside of a large document. Because that's one of the other issues with template engines is that, and PHP in general, is that it will preserve the white space, right? So if these characters, right, like if this, like let's say we had something pretty common, a UL, and then we did PHP, had some type of for each loop that had, you know, Y as Z, right? And then we basically did echo li, or some people would actually like escape out of the PHP, but we're not going to do that. And then we would say like Z, right? And then close out the li. Well, PHP is going to like keep a hold of these tabs, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you know, 8 tabs, and it's all white space, right? So if it is 8 bytes, then it's like, you know, 64 bytes for each list item, and then if you have, you know, 1,000 of those list items, that's like 6K of just white space, right? And carriage returns are the same way, and everything like that. So anyway, that was a good ancillary benefit. So what I'm thinking is, I don't know what this exercise is yet, not going to lie. But we started with string, and I sort of started getting really fascinated with this concept. And so basically what I'm thinking is I'm going to start the project Shoop PHP. Now, Shoop is, I'm using the internet slang of photoshopped, because we talked about this in some of the string videos, that basically the API and how you interact with PHP is kind of ugly, right, and inconsistent and that sort of a thing, and rightfully so, right? Like I'm not knocking the language, to be totally honest. If you know the history of the language, even remotely, like it makes sense of how it got here. That's not why we're here. So Shoop, overarching, photoshopped, right? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to kind of airbrush the API, right? That's kind of what we're doing here. We're just kind of airbrushing the API to say, hey, you know what? Let's do it this way. But Shoop is also an acronym. In this case, it stands for Swift, which is where we're sort of getting our data types as well as the APIs, and also taking on the emphasis of a protocol-oriented language or programming methodology. And we'll get more into that later. The H is for Haskell, not specifically the Haskell language, but the concept of functional programming in general, the idea of immutability versus, or immutability over mutability, right? So stateless versus stateful, and basically keeping side effects as local as possible. So we're going to see some interesting things there, I think. The OO is for object-oriented, specifically encapsulation by way of namespacing, right? Now, because I'm not going to tell you that, oh yeah, no, this is going to be totally object-oriented, because most code that we say is object-oriented actually isn't, outside of the fact that we name our classes objects, because they're not passing messages and receiving messages, and there's not that notion. So anyway, so object-oriented. And then the P is for procedural, right? Which is to say that we're going to give it steps in a sequence, give PHP steps in a sequence to follow to get us to the end result that we want, as opposed to logical programming, which operates in a different way. And while I'm doing this, there's going to be, or while we're doing this, there's going to be this list of things that we're going to start sort of playing with and testing the merits of, right? So things like classes should favor composition over inheritance. Classes should be viewed only as an entry point, not necessarily the result, right? So just because you start by instantiating a string doesn't mean you're going to get a string back, right? And some of these might seem obvious, and that's the point. It's just to capture them and go, hey, I think this is a good idea, prove me wrong, right? Or prove us wrong, or, don't prove us wrong. Let's have the debate. Let's have the conversation. So anyway, that's what we're doing. So basically, how do we do that? What we're going to do is we're actually going to expand our mind just a little bit, and we're going to delve deeper into the standard library. We're going to expand our breadth and depth, right? So because there are different basic data types, right? So bool, int, double float, range, closed range. I'm not going to include error and error handling yet. So that's sort of the idea. Now the problem, and we ran into this in the beginning with string, is it's a naming problem, right? So that's why we went with str instead of something else, right? Is that we can't name it string because that's a reserved name by PHP. But at the same time, is str really fair, I guess? And so one of the things that the Friends of PHP did with the PHP documenter is they actually, anything that was a reserved name, they would just add an underscore to the end of it. I thought that was actually kind of brilliant, right? Like float underscore, range underscore. Now, part of us kind of going through this exercise is to just sort of demonstrate what can be done and not necessarily keep it in PHP. So as an alternative, we might do what Next Step did with Smalltalk. Well, yeah, no. Anyway, basically, somebody who really liked Smalltalk needed to be able to feed the family, so to speak, and created Objective-C, which is just a just air quotes, is a superset of C, and then Next Step bought Objective-C and then created the libraries, and so they have things like, that's why inside of Objective-C you have things like NS string, NS object, NS number, right? Because the NS stands for next step, right? And so I'm thinking about doing the same thing here, right? So it's basically eightfold shoop. And you do see this a little bit in the PHP community, and I do think that it is kind of safe. The only drawback would be that if somebody wanted to do this in a different language, if somebody other than eightfold did something, right, it would no longer be ES, it would be something else, right? Those two characters would be different. And so basically, like, Ruby would have, let's say RR string instead of ES string, right? So yeah, not sure how to govern that, or even if we should. Now, there's another option, which is to use safe names anyway, right? So instead of class bool, we'll use class boolean, right? Because boolean is not actually a reserved name. And instead of string, we'll say symbols, right? Because a string is just a sequence of symbols, right? And then we have inside of the class itself the function of string, right? The reserved name that we can't, the name which shall not be named. And then we can do the same thing with number, where we have int, double float as functions inside of that, or as initializers inside of that. Right now, I think I'm going to go with the ES, right? So But I do want to keep those notes. So I'm going to come back over to our code and add them as a note. So possible naming convention. All right, and I don't need that bottom part. Okay, so and I've already done some setup work, right? Like I moved the tests and things like that, and I think they all pass. Yeah, so we're good there. Let's go ahead and start with Bool. And the reason for that is because it's a binary object. It doesn't have much in the way of complexity. So let's go here. Struct Bool, right? Da, 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 da. And you might be asking yourself, like, why would anybody actually do this? Again, I don't know yet. We'll get there. If we're able to identify a problem that we're solving, that is. I'm going to leave that as str for now until we come back to it. I'm going to say bool.php, and we're going to say name. Let's come down here, come up that. A fold shoop. I'm going to say ns, or not ns, es bool. And we're going to make this a little bit bigger, and we're going to create a test. Let's just go ahead and copy one of these. So duplicate. We're going to call this Bool test, and we're going to say Bool. There it is. Test case Shoop. We're going to say es Bool. Do I need test strings? No, because we're not doing a string anymore. So I'm going to call this Bool test. I'm going to drop all that, and we're going to say public function test can initialize, right? Like, if you've watched any of these videos, you know that was coming. Let's go ahead and make this bigger too. Ooh, let's go ahead and use origami to create a pane below, and then we're going to use origami again to create a pane to the right. Not that it really matters. Put our test down there, and then come over here and grab our shell and put it down in the bottom right. All right, now this is starting to feel a little bit more real. Okay, so we're going to say es bool. And this one we're just going to do init. It doesn't really have a lot of special initializers, and I'm going to say true, and then I'm going to say this assert not null. I'm going to say result and run the test. And apparently we need to look at our PHP. Yeah, so string, I need to put the bool directory in there. I'm going to call that bool, and we're going to call that bool, and run it again. There we go. We have an error, and that's because we don't have the initializer. Oh, that file name. Yeah, that file name, though. Should probably be esbool. Mainly because you never know, like, what environment you could end up in that's going to actually care. Alright, so now what do we have? We're going to have a static public function, and it needs to be init, and it's going to take a PHP boolean, or is it? Yes, it will always do that. If you're going to initialize it, because I was thinking, like, what if you actually used an ES bool? And it's like, why would you do that? Like, why would you initialize an ES bool with an ES bool. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So there we go. And we're basically going to call that bool. Sure, why not? And it's going to return ES bool, and we're going to say return new ES bool and bool. And then we need a constructor. We do indeed. So function, public function, underscore, underscore. Construct, it's going to take a Boolean value. See, now this one might be different. Well, no. Again, I don't understand why you would do that. All right, so this, I think we're going to want to make this a little bit more generic. And so I'm just going to call it value. And we'll probably see why it's a benefit later. So we're going to say private. We're going to call this value. We're going to call it true. Sure, why not? Let's do this, in fact. Let's go ahead and set up the default values. So by default, if you just initialize this thing, it is going to be true. So right on. So it's not null. Let's go ahead and make sure that it's true. So how do we want to get to the content or get to the value? Assert true result. I mean, one thing we could do is we could do bool, right? Kind of like we do with string, or with the string class. At least I think that's what we do. Do we not? Command R. String, yeah, and this, it basically just returns the raw string value. To make it more generic, we could say, you know, PHP, or we could say base, or we could say whatever, I don't know. But yeah, so let's go ahead and just do bool for now. And we're doing errors because it does not understand bool. So we're going to come down here, we're going to create another public function, we're going to call it bool. It does not take a value, it returns a bool. And it returns this bool, or no, this value, in fact. Yep, so that's good. So now let's test our default behavior. There we go. Okay, so we have the beginnings of the bool class. And the thing about it is that it's not, oh, this is interesting. I might not do that yet, and I might not do these either. Basically, I'm thinking when it comes to initializers, we're going to stick with that one as long as we can, like that single one. And so, oh, hey, description, we might be able to get away with making description real quick. So let's go ahead and say this, assert equals true, and it's going to be result description. And we should get an error. We do. So we should be able to say public function description, and it's going to return a string. Now here's where it gets funny, right? Because this should probably be our string class. So, so I'm going to go ahead and see, when you don't like comments in your code, it becomes really easy to tell which you're notating for changes. So return string class, not literal. All right, so now we're going to return and PHP bool to string. Yep, that's what I thought was going to be a suitable answer. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to say if this value, right, so if it's true, we're going to use a ternary operator, then what we're going to return is a string that says true. Otherwise, we're going to return a string that says false. So that worked. What are we at, 34 minutes? Ooh, we might be able to do something. So let's go back to bool. Random. Why would you want to do that? I don't even understand. Let's do toggle. So if we do function, public function, toggle takes no values, and it's going to return a bool. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to return, or no, we want to set. So it's going to be this value equals bang this value, and then we're going to return this instance. So what that should mean is if I come over here and we say leave it assert true for now, and we're going to say result toggle, and then we do bool, and this should fail. There's out. Why? Toggle must be a type Boolean returned outright. Yes, bool. So let's try that. That fails, so we should be able to say fails. Or no, assert false. Yeah. Very cool. And we'll do the comparisons next time. I still don't understand why you'd want to have random. Returns a random Boolean value using the given generator as a source for randomness. All right. Fair enough. I think we're going to do the random thing next time as well. So, but you see what I mean? Like Boolean is kind of light. Right, like string had a bunch of stuff and functions and things like that. Boolean, on the other hand, is just kind of light, right? And so then what we can end up doing is go back to our string class and start really plugging in some of these, basically switching out to allow for the new Boolean class that we just wrote, right? Like, so removing empty values, that's a Boolean. That could be an ES bool that we decide to use. Trying to think, or rather trying to find. And see, there's something that could be, here as well, but I don't think it's going to be immediate that we're going to see it, if that makes sense. Oh yeah, and in the is same as. Oh yeah, no, I mean that's what I was just looking at. So anyway, hopefully you get the idea, but and hopefully you get the other idea of this sort of being not just about that string class and maybe having, yeah, see, in a string down there, next step, just sort of being able to, yeah, standard library int struct, yeah, just create a common interface into PHP. And anyhow, yeah. So that'll be that for today. As always, thank you for making the time. Definitely do appreciate it, and I'll see you around.